Hello everyone, my name's David. I work at BrowserStack, and today I'm going to be talking about how you're probably running your OSPO wrong, but it's not your fault. And so I'm going to talk through all of this. I know it sounds a little controversial, but hopefully by the end of it, you're going to have rethought some of the assumptions that you've got, that you will think through how you can change it. And hopefully, as a group, because this is going to need everyone involved, as a group, we can solve some of the sustainability problems in the open source space. So, without further ado, let's get my slides up and get started. As I said, my title of my talk is Why You're Probably Running Your OSPO Wrong and How It's Not Your Fault. So I'm going to start with who am I? And so I'm not going to go through kind of my entire CV, but the idea of this section is mostly to show you how I think through problems, how you interpret them, and then hopefully by the end of it, you will understand where I'm coming from and we can go from there. So, as I said, my name's David. I work at BrowserStack. I head up the open source programming office. And we, BrowserStack does infrastructure as a service type work in that we allow people to test their website or their app, and the app could be on mobile, on TVs, to make sure that they have confidence in their what they're building, and we help scale out everything so that they can run their tests as fast as possible when using our infrastructure. Before that, I worked at Mozilla for 9.5 years. I started as an IC, individual contributor, went into management, moved around to different parts of the company doing different things. And so, and before that, I've kind of worked in open source for a long time. So I think kind of I've been working on open source projects for about 15 years, and for probably around 11 of those, nearly 11 of those, I've managed to be fortunate enough to get paid for working on open source. And so with this in mind, I want you to kind of hopefully realize that I'm approaching this as an engineering problem when I came to BrowserStack, because one of the things I needed to do, well, the first thing I needed to do was create the organization, the open source program office. And I needed to do it in a way that was supportive of the way BrowserStack works. We're a for-profit company, so I've got to kind of always think about the bottom dollar. But I also needed to look at how we could best support open source projects out there and support their needs, to make them as successful as we are. I'm a huge fan of the kind of cliche of a rising tide lifts all ships. And so I want to, like that was always the thought going through my brain. And so my first place that I started from was, how do most open source program officers work, right? Like, what do they do? What is their day to day? How do they measure success? How do they support teams? How do they support the community? How do they do all of this? And obviously supporting the company. How do you do this? And well, there was a lot of research. I started looking at large tech companies, so the likes of like Google, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, I also started looking at some of the smaller companies, like startups. And there are some startups who kind of fairly early on create an open source program office, which is amazing. And I think that it's a huge credit to them that they want to support open source that way. And I looked at everything in between. I also thought I wanted to make sure that I wanted to look at it because, like, I work at a tech company, but I wanted to look and see if there was anything that open source groups at media companies were doing differently. Financial institutions like fintech, like what were they doing differently? And what were the bits that I wanted to emulate? And I started looking through it all. And I collected a lot of information. I chatted to a lot of people on Slack, and I tried to see where we could be beneficial to where we needed to be. And so in searching this, I started to notice certain patterns, the same thing over and over and over in each of the companies. Now, I know this is pre-recorded and is virtual, so I'm not going to see the results of this. But I'm going to ask the question anyway, and maybe you can send me a message later. If you're working in an OSPO, how does the group slant? Like, where are the most amount of jobs, or like people who do jobs, and what are their job titles? Is it either a kind of heavily slanted towards engineering, or is it heavily slanted towards TPM, technical project managers, or some form of compliance and legal, or a mixture of kind of technical project managers and compliance and legal? I'm just going to pause there, like let you think about it, and then I'll carry on. And so the other thing that I wanted to check when going through all of these steps was the sustainability. How could we maintain sustainability in an open source project? And so one of the things that, like, the reason why I was going through the who am I at the beginning was that hopefully it was fairly obvious that I come from a very engineering heavy background, and I tend to think of things as an engineer. And open source to me is engineering at its heart. So kind of how do we support and sustain that? And so I also needed to now look at the problem of what is sustainability. Now, for every project is different. They have different requirements, different needs on what makes something sustainable. And so I needed to look at it in a different way. And so like if there's an open source project that BrowserStack is looking and it's being maintained by Google, I know that I'm pretty sure that they don't need any more money. I don't think Google need more money at all. I don't, and the same with Facebook or Meta or even Apple, right? And so sustainability is not, like, some people confuse it for money, and for some projects that is the biggest thing that they care about. But I think we needed to create a mechanism to spot what makes a project sustainable. And to me, the end point is that the project moves on and on and on, and that's when it hits a nice equilibrium that makes it sustainable. Some projects need money, some projects need infrastructure, And so at BrowserStack, if you're an open source project and you need to test your website or test your app, we can definitely do that for you. The OSPO, not directly because we've kind of handed it off, but the OSPO makes sure that open source projects that want to use BrowserStack's infrastructure can do so and do so for free. Because sometimes it's not about money, it's just about kind of being able to carry on doing what you're doing. And the other thing that I wanted to make sure that is when I looked at the sustainability problem is that we didn't allow small projects to become core infrastructure. And this is not about removing the small project, it's about making sure that that thing or that code, feature, whatever, is properly supported. We've all seen what happened with Log4j this year, or last year. Time has flown and I've lost track, but we don't want situations like Log4j, which is just kind of scared a lot of people in that kind of were heavily dependent on it, and now they were like, oh, I've got all these problems that I need to solve, and it's a 0 day. So a 0 day means it's a bug that is an attack vector that is in the wild and is being exploited. That's what a 0 day means. Like, it takes 0 days for someone to attack you. And so how could we make sure that we don't have situations like that, or other situations that we've also noticed through kind of in the JavaScript community, where people have like pulled projects or kind of essentially bombed the project because people weren't noticing that they were asking for money and they couldn't afford to maintain it anymore. And so for sustainability, it's about kind of making sure that we don't have these situations and making them worse, because it's important that we do the right thing. So the question that popped into my head, and it's stayed there, and it's how I've kind of structured it, is what if we made the open source program office a programming office, and we made them engineering led? So instead of being heavily leaning towards TPMs or heavily leaning towards legal and compliance, we made them engineering focused. We allowed them to kind of create an engineering organization within a company. At BrowserStack, the OSPO lives inside the office of the CTO, and we report up into them, and we kind of make sure that we're effectively an engineering organization so that we can support projects. And by support, like a lot of the times, the way companies support, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the way most companies support it is they'll give a gift to that project. And this could be a sponsorship. And so some projects don't need more money. As I said, like, you know, you're not going to give money over to React because it's a Facebook project, and Facebook don't need any more money. But you might give it over to like an open collective, Tidelift, of kind of mechanism of supporting projects that way. And so I looked at it and I tried to see how we could make those projects sustainable, better. And one of the things I tried to make sure as well is that if it supported my competitors, BrowserStack's competitors, it didn't matter, because the most important thing is about sustaining the open source space and making those teams successful. And so the way we did this is we offered them the gift of time. Now, you're probably looking at me like, David, how do you give someone the gift of time? Because I've kind of worked in open source for so long, the one constant that I've seen happen through time is people's circumstances change. When I started working in open source, I didn't have children. I now have 2. And that's changed my priorities. I've seen this in a number of projects where kind of I had a lot of time before kids. After kids, I don't have so much time. And so how do we give projects and open source projects that are important to kind of the bread and butter of a company, how do we give them time? At BrowserStack, because we are engineering led and we have an engineering focus predominantly, we still have the TPMs, we still have the legal and compliance side, because those are important. And like, the one thing I want to make abundantly clear is that I'm advocating for the increase in size of your OSPO, not changing the roles. Is that by giving time, we can give over an engineer to make sure that that changes. Like, if we need a feature implemented, it can be implemented. And we don't do this in a way to take over the project, because that's unfair. Because like the point is that we're trying to give over time. We want to be members of a community, not taking over the community, because that is a very different dichotomy, and we need to just avoid that. The other way that we've done it is when there is a project that we really care about, we've effectively done an acqui-hire to hire the engineer and kind of fold things into BrowserStack so that we can make them successful and make their projects successful, because we know that it's in turn, and it might not be straight away, because kind of acqui-hires are not always, you don't make your return on investment within a year. Like, investments take years to return, right? This is important. So we give them time by hiring them in and giving them the tools to make them successful. Access to marketing, access to TPMs, which they might not have had before, access to legal and compliance. I've worked on open source projects where Patent Troll has come along and said, hey, I would like this money because your open source project is affecting my patent. That was patently wrong, excuse the pun, but and when that happened, we managed to get an OSPO's legal team to help us. So this is all about increasing the time and support that we can offer to these projects. And by offering time to a lot of projects, we offer sustainability to the project. And we also kind of try make sure that it's sustainable by kind of pulling everything into one project and not having trying to be equal partners within a project. Things can happen, bad things can happen, right? Like, we want to be equal. We don't want to take over projects, because rarely does that work out in the way that we expect it to work out. And so we need to build this out in a fashion that allows us to support projects in a meaningful way so that we can build out that consensus. And that's what we've been doing. So BrowserStack has a number of engineers working on the Selenium project, which is our core tool to our automate and app automate features that we sell. And we're adding features that there are times where it doesn't necessarily, it could kind of hamper our business, in that like people might feel that they don't need us anymore. But there are other benefits to kind of using BrowserStack that kind of always bring them back. And so that has proven to not be an actual issue when we've been doing this. We've given our customers a voice in these projects all of a sudden where they've never had that voice. That creates that sustainability, that movement of the project, that churn of the code, and that allows us to kind of keep them going and keep that consensus, because we've never tried to take over. We're trying to be guardians of a project, not kind of dictators. That doesn't support open source projects, it doesn't support sustainability, and it doesn't fit in with how we do it. And we try to kind of start branching out. So we've been doing this for 2 years, and we've been building out projects to kind of at an engineering level to support projects, as well as doing the usual that we were doing before, taking inner source, moving it out, maintaining it, looking at open source projects that might not necessarily need us straight away, or they've already got something like a mechanism for dispersing funds if we sponsored them, and they've already got hires, or the engineer who's created it already works for themselves and is able to kind of take some of that money and support the project. We still maintain all those things, and I still encourage you to do that. But I want to kind of make sure that as we move forward, that we support each other, support the projects that are important to our projects and our companies, and we make them sustainable by making them more engineering focused, and trying to get all of that in place, and then not randomly just killing off projects because we don't want to pay for an engineer at that time, because that will hamper our sustainability. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I really look forward to them. I've been David. I'm at Automated Tester on Twitter or Mastodon. Feel free to message me with any questions you want, or kind of ask in the Q&A section. And I hope you found that really useful. Thank you for your time, everyone. Goodbye.